Normal People is a miniseries based off the 2018 novel by Sally Rooney. The series follows the relationship between Maureen Sheridan, played by Daisy Edgar-Jones, and Connell Walden, played by Paul Mescal, as they keep running into each other's lives throughout adulthood. The series and book got massive acclaim for their perspective nature on relationships, destiny, and the human condition. It is one of the most raw and authentic depictions of the pain and beauty of making complicated relationships in this lifetime. Today, I have on Workshopping Humanity contributor Jared Rocha on to discuss this wonderful series on Workshopping Humanity, where we explore and dissect what media influence on a society as a whole and what they mean to us on a personal level. Welcome back to Workshopping Humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's been a long time. It's been a long time coming. Because to be honest with you, I don't even know yet what I'm going to keep up on main feed or not. So this might be the first episode you guys have seen in like years, just depending on how it goes. So, welcome back. I mean, it's been a while and I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be here. We are coming back on, I think, something that's very fitting, at least for me to come back on, which is the short series Normal People, which I just recently watched for the first time, even though it's been out for like 5 years. Look at me catching up with television. But I decided to help me today. We'd have our television aficionado here, Jared Rocha. Say hey, Jared.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Yes, welcome back. I know we've been through a lot. We recently just came back from TIFF, and we're still kind of like trying to settle down back into normal life. And, you know, it was very exciting when Brett was saying he was starting to watch Normal People. I am very much a television guy, even though it's hard to go between television and film. There's still so many great stories that a television medium can offer, including Normal People. I always say one of my main theories I like to talk about, not theories, but my main statements, was that 2020, if you take that year, which of course was with COVID and whatnot, that was actually like an amazing year for miniseries as a whole. We had the Normal People that came right when lockdown started, so it hit kind of like the, oh, we're camped up and we might be a little horny, but we'll talk about that for certain aspects of the show. You had The Queen's Gambit on Netflix blowing up that fall. You had HBO's I May Destroy You, which was very revolutionary. And then my personal favorite, I still get everyone in the group chat to watch, Luke Guadagnino's We Are Who We Are. So just hitting like all great like projects that came out in 2020, all these great like miniseries. And then I think Underground Railroad also came out that same year, but Barry Jenkins miniseries, but correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not 100% sure. So that's another kind of like great, like, oh my gosh, we got a lot of great just miniseries. So I'm happy that we can talk about one of them, Normal People.
Normal People is the one that's really has stayed the test of time. Like, people still talk about it to this day.
Yeah. And then it's like coming from the year 2024, right, where Paul Mescal has been this indie star that's slowly rising. We are coming pre-Gladiator 2, his first kind of big on-screen blockbuster role, whereas Daisy Edgar-Jones just was a hot shot over the summer with Twisters, and we also saw her on Swift Horses at TIFF, so she's had a pretty good year. I mean, like, without the show, we wouldn't have that. I truly believe this is like such a, it's gonna keep on going on as the years go on and prove to be such an important like piece of art for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Paul Mescal, he's like Oscar nominated now. You know, he's an Oscar nominee. It's
he's
crazy.
An Oscar nominee, yeah,
which is so cool. And this is where it all started. Mm-hmm. And they're both like, I mean, just the
they're
cut
just so amazing.
To the chase. They're both amazing in this series. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So, first off, I want to start kind of with my relationship with this series as a whole, which is complicated. So, I knew about Normal People when it came out. It was on my radar, but it wasn't on my like immediate radar. I was definitely a midnight gospel person in COVID and Ted Lasso, and I mean, I think I watched Tiger King later. But like Normal People is kind of like, I knew about it. I knew people were buzzing about it, but like I take a long time to get to TV. But I kept seeing Normal People kind of get compared to the likes of like a La La Land or a Lost in Translation or a Her about like a relationship that is destined to not work out. And without getting, I guess, too personal here, this year kind of had me going back to that media. And as I was discovering that media, I was like, I've never seen Normal People before. And so I started watching it on Hulu. And this is what it's interesting because with a series, sometimes if I get really, really invested and engrossed in a series, I will blow through it in like 1 to 2 days, especially if it's a short series. Like I'm just like glued in, I'm locked in, playing episode after episode. Normal People took me like a month and a half to finish because this is such a raw and stressful show to me that I would have to take breathers. Like I'd be like, all right, I've watched 3 episodes. I'm going to stop right there. I got to decompress what I just saw because it is such an authentic look at something that I find incredibly personal. To me at least. I mean, there's specific moments and situations between these two characters that I have lived through, like genuinely, where I was like, shoot. And so I felt very seen by it. And that's kind of why I was like, well, we got to bring back workshopping humanity with Normal People because like that's what the entire show is about. And I just feel like I'm seeing parts of my life being thrown back at me. And so I'm interested, and I'm also interested because Jared, it's been like 4 years since you've watched it, right?
So that's gonna be my big struggle on
Yeah.
this podcast. Is it's been a while, so I've been living through kind of edits a little of the major scenes and whatnot. But
Yeah.
I think I watched it. I checked my Letterboxd. I finished it like in January of 2021, so not like right when it dropped, but definitely a couple months after. It really was honestly because of the hype and of Paul Mescal, and then there was a whole like trend of like his gold chain, of the iconic gold chain, and just the how like how hot it was and how great it was, and the performances as well, and these two newcomers. I'm like, let me strap in, and it was it's a wild it's a ride. I totally agree with you. One of my main, going back to kind of like my television bullet points, is I am very much team like I would prefer a weekly than a binge for sure. And so this show kind of benefits from that, even though I think all the episodes did drop at once when it first dropped here on Hulu. This is a nice like, okay, we're gonna take a walk around the neighborhood for the next like hour to kind of decompress after all that. It's because it's so focused on just these two people. Um, Fate kind of keeps bringing them together. They make decisions that you're like, Connell, no, we can't say that we're together because you're two people who are semi-adults, and I don't know, that happened. They were in like their high school, so I guess we can attribute that to high school feelings, just but it feels all so relatable, and there's no fantasy element. It feels raw, and it feels just so natural, from just the dialogue to the much talked about like sensual scenes, of course, and then so I gotta praise like the production of it all, especially for, I always think, like when you have to do, as an actor, this is your first role and you have to do like those scenes in the bedroom, right? And it's like you have to have such a great team, and I'm really glad that it seemed like both Paul and Daisy haven't said anything bad about their production, so I'm really glad that they had a great team, and it's just a beautiful show, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know recently Paul Mescal's kind of starting his Gladiator 2 interviews, and so he was with GQ, he was on the cover, and he did like a timeline of his career. He talked about how they had a charity screening of all the episodes of Normal People in a theater, and he said it was just a really great experience because television, you don't get that experience of watching in the dark with other people, but it was so nice for him and Daisy to kind of see it with a crowd and have that kind of very unique, lucky experience, which that was like a really cool fun fact, and I'm glad them as artists got to see that and get to see their work in that light and kind of reflect, especially after it's been like 4 or 5 years since they've done it.
Yeah, especially yeah, for sure. It's like especially because Normal People is very cinematic in its presentation. It feels the way that Twin Peaks Return does, and the way it feels like it's 12 parts. I don't even think they have titles for the episodes, right? It's just like part one, part two, part three. I could be wrong on that, but I believe that's the case, which totally makes sense because it's just like, I mean, time passes through the episodes, but you don't really feel like, oh, this is the start of another episode. This is the start of another episode. Like, it's just kind of like life weaves and intersects into different people and stuff. And it's just like one episode starts and it's like, oh, okay, so some years have passed and here's some new characters, which was kind of an interesting way to approach the subject, to be honest. Um, but like you were saying, going back to the very beginning of the show, I think it's really interesting setup because at the beginning it's kind of like setting up that Connell is kind of not, I don't want to say that I was immediately like, oh, boo Connell, but you could just tell that he was an immature kid. He is a high schooler, and it wasn't the fact that he didn't love this girl. It was just the fact that like he was like, well, my reputation's on the line because she's kind of weird, and it's one of these things where it's like that's so authentically high school for people. And I kind of love that the show doesn't necessarily, for the rest of the time, just dog on him for doing that originally. And it kind of does forgive him in that regard because, like, he's a good guy. Like, throughout the series, you figure out that he is a caring, compassionate dude. And what I love about both of the characters is how much they do change and evolve throughout the show. Like, by the time it's the last episode, you have felt like you've lived a part of your adulthood with them, which is a really great thing. And it's subtle, too, because it's interesting that they don't really age throughout the series because, you know, it's hard to do that, but, like, it still felt. I mean, especially between the episode of the high school dance and in the next episode where they like meet up at a party in college, there's definitely a transformation. Daisy looks different in that episode onward, which is appreciated because then you're like, okay, I get it. It's been a few years or whatever, but because that is one of the funniest parts of the show for me, and it's just there's not much you can do, but like it's like the first few episodes they're like, yeah, Daisy, she's kind of like the outsider and she's kind of like weird or whatever, and it's like she's just like a gorgeous girl wearing baggy clothes. Like, it's I don't know what else we can do, but like obviously there's not much they can do in that scenario. But you know.
They're soulmates, I guess. And they're soulmates in the way that the world wants them, that fate wants them together. For some reason, they have an effect in their lives, and then they're just normal. They're normal people being like, okay, let's awkward. Oh, okay, yeah, let's try and roll. Oh, heartbreak. Oh, there's no superhero coming to save them. It's just the life of it all. Um,
Yeah, and that is the thing about this show though, is that it does have its moments of brevity, but then all of a sudden it'll just lay you with like the most intense thing where you're just like, oh, my heart. And a lot of it isn't even just like anything remotely like terrible. It's the fact that like, man, having feelings for someone is a really painful experience just in general. And the idea that like destiny keeps bringing them back into their lives for whatever reason, and they don't really know why, and they won't really know why until they're on the other side. And that's kind of the most infuriating thing about the show. It doesn't give any clear answers. It's just like, yeah, they're supposed to be here for each other for whatever reason, and they make each other grow for whatever reason, even though it's the most painful thing for both of them.
yeah, with Jamie's in between. Jamie, I think is right. Yeah.
We hate Jamie here in this
Oh my
household.
gosh.
That is an
Yeah.
interesting aspect of the show I did definitely want to get into at some point. Was she becomes a match kiss at some point of the show, which is a really interesting turn. I don't know if that has to do with some sort of repressed childhood trauma that she's pushing on, but you know, she ends up having these boyfriends who are just like the worst people you can ever imagine. But she something inherently turns her on about being abused, which is very like. And then there's that scene at the diner where she's talking to Connell about it, and he's like, "Is that like, do you like enjoy that?" And she's like, "Well, with him, but not with you, because it was different with you. I didn't have to have that wall with you. And it's almost like she could have a normal functioning relationship with him, but no one else in her life she could. If she didn't know how to reciprocate that, which I think is a really interesting character beat. And it's something that made me think a lot afterwards, for sure, about how that, because for me, throughout the show, I was kind of like, I think it would have been an interesting angle for her to have had a boyfriend in the show that was just like a nice, compassionate dude, and it just doesn't work out. Kind of in a similar way of Jamie, or like the husband in Past Lives, just like completely nice dude, just doesn't work out. And she never has that. Like the rest of the men in her life are just awful abusive to her. And that was interesting until I realized that that's kind of inherently the point of the show as well, is to show that like there's some people in some relationships that will gravitate towards people that hurt them. And it's kind of like that Perks of Being a Wallflower quote, because you think, you accept the love that you think you deserve type of thing. It's a psychological breakdown of kind of that mentality. But that was a dark aspect of the show I wasn't prepared for it to bring up, to be honest, where I was like, oof, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a scene where Connell essentially rejects Maureen for the dance, and it's this big thing. Even I love Connell's mom in this show. She's hilarious, and I love the fact that like Connell's like, can you support me on this? And she's like, no, because you're wrong. And I was like, good for you. Call your kid out more for being dumb. Like, what a queen. Because like I love the fact that she just like really cares and loves Maureen throughout the series as well. Like that was a really sweet relationship. But there's a scene essentially where he tries calling Maureen back, and she's essentially just like ghosting him, and he just like breaks down crying because he realizes what he's done. And that was like one of the scenes very early on in the show where I was like, I'm hooked. I'm really like this, because in a lot of shows like that would have felt melodramatic. It would have felt like, oh, okay, there's a high school dance and it didn't really work out your way, so now you're going to start bawling or whatever. But we had gotten so attached to these characters, and we had been in their psyche so much that it hits. It's this emotional beat that hits. And it's like, and from Paul Mescal, who's, like we said before, incredible in the show, it's an ugly cry. It's an ugly cry you don't see very often in TV. And I thought that was a really, really compelling way to like hook you into that character, because like you've been kind of frustrated with him the first 3 episodes, and once he breaks down you realize, oh shoot, this is a human that's made a mistake, and I feel bad for them, like I hope they can get their act together. And that's those little humanistic qualities of this show that make it so compelling.
So I remember speaking about Connell and Paul Mescal, I remember reading about how he wanted, he was so in the book, he said the book was so raw that like he had to give everything of himself to this role. So you talk about just the rawness of the ugly crying, and also he talked about he did not use a prosthetic for those scenes, because he just attributed to, hey, we're going all in, we're being raw, let's go, which is again crazy.
Yeah, that's daring,
for sure. I think human nature is like, I'm not saying Daisy and Paul are dating, like not doing that. I think you have to be like, they're each other's like best friends. I'm really finding it hard. I don't believe there's a world where they're not like the best friends. When you go through an experience like you and that like Daisy and Paul went through, I don't think you're like, okay, bye, I hope to never see you again, And I mean, you even see it on social media. I think they're like, they have to be like the best friends ever, like, woo. Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting if they're having their own normal people relationship in Hollywood, and because like honestly, like,
and it's worse. It's probably worse like being in Hollywood, right? Because you're like having a good summer, and then boom, you see Twister ad, and your face, Daisy's face is on there. Or if it's the other way around with her, you see Gladiator 2 posters plastered everywhere, and it's Paul, and it's like, oh.
There he is.
I want just another random thing to talk about normal people. I haven't sat down and fully read Sally Rooney book, But what I found was interesting is that all her books, they don't have, the quotation marks like, hey, I'm going to the farmer's market, question mark. Everything is kind of like run on sentences, and which I found super interesting. I have to actually, I have, weirdly enough, I don't have Normal People. I have her other book, Conversations with Friends, which was also made into a Hulu show. And then during the big Hulu tax write-off, they took it off. So don't know if I'll ever see that again.
Oh,
But it's
that's
so
sad.
sad. But that's the entertainment industry. You have to be a hit, like, or nothing at all, and boo. Anyway,
I still blame. I know that it's not Zagzloff, but I still
oh yeah, they
blame.
copied him. He did it first. I think that's
Yeah.
why.
So.
But yeah, I don't know. I was just trying to make a point like that's so interesting and how they translated. I guess if this was more of an interview with the creators, I would say how that process went to kind of like from just run on sentences and words to kind of a screenplay where they have to say the dialogue, how much is in the glaze of someone else's eyes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Cause I haven't read any of her books. I've been wanting to pick up the book. Like even went to Barnes and Noble today and saw it and almost picked it up. I didn't realize they were written that way, and that's
I
intriguing to
feel
me.
like
I wonder how that
Yeah, I
works.
feel like all her books. I know she just debuted a new one called like Intermazio or something like that. I feel like there would be something like stories I would like, so I should get on it for sure. And
Hmm. Yeah, and that is the other thing about like I think it's the idea that she can create and write a whole book that gets turned to a miniseries, and essentially just the premise is like, these two people, they just keep having misconnections,
mm-hmm.
and they're like soul, you know,
Yeah,
is really a testament to how powerful the storytelling is. Because like I mentioned before, it's not like stories like this haven't existed before. This is kind of past lives. This is kind of La La
mm-hmm.
Land, but at the same time, like I think the realism of the show and how stripped down it is really what helps it actually stand out. It's not like there's a big musical numbers or a man's in love with his iPod or it's like even past lives is a lot more sweeping and cinematic than this show. Like this show is very much conversations with people and then more than conversations with people and then conversations with people. And I think it's a way to just get to the meat and potatoes of the situation and have that naturalistic dialogue.
Yeah,
Because even essentially, whenever they just decide to stay friends but stay a part of each other's lives because they mean a lot to each other, all of that, the tension is just there the whole time if that's going to work or not. And it's kind of like a high wire act
mm-hmm.
throughout that whole show. Is like this idea of like, well, is he going to say something that's going to make this not work? Is she going to say something? Are they going to act upon their feelings? Because there's still obviously a spark here, but they don't know how they can reciprocate that because wrong time, wrong place, wrong scenario,
Mm-hmm.
And that's the tough balance of the show.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
also,
Um.
I don't want
Oh,
to
you're
interrupt you. I was
no,
just
you're
gonna
good.
say, I think what was interesting too. Now that I realize what you were saying is, I attributed maybe to the fact that this was also a BBC production. So like in the UK, it's on BBC because there's no Hulu, and so they helped with Hulu make the show. But the fact that it was greenlit in the streaming age, 12 episodes of just this romance. I feel like that's getting harder and harder to greenlit to this day. So much so that I wonder if even if today it would get greenlit, because that's how dire I feel like almost the entertainment industry is becoming, and we're getting told like no more risk, stay with IPs, we're losing money, risk adverse industry. That's just what we are right
Yeah.
now. And then I guess you could say Normal People was a popular book, so it is technically an IP. So
Yeah.
maybe that also helped. It's still kind of amazing. I still like that it got made for 12 episodes. I can't imagine some American producer was like, we could probably like cut it up to like 6, cut out like the high school stuff
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and like I just imagine a world where it's like some like American producer doing that. But thankfully, she probably Sally, I'm not 100% sure, worked really well with the team, and they made it fit the length, and they found 12 episodes really good, and yeah.
To be honest, they could have made this longer if they really wanted to. There's a lot of material here, and there's still some things like I love this show. I don't think it's inherently perfect, but it hit me like a bullet.
Mm-hmm.
It hit me deep where I lived, but I do think within structure there are some episodes where you probably could have focused more here than here. You know, like I think a lot of people point out the episode that's just with them and their different relationships, and she's with the guy who's like taking pictures with her or whatever, and like ultimately they're reiterating some same points in that episode that they've already covered. And so I do think there is some tightening, but I would rather have there be loose narrative threads than it feel like, oh, we just got here and we didn't get to spend any time with these characters, you know? Because the thing about life is that life is repetitive as well.
Mm-hmm.
We make the same mistakes a lot of times. That's just kind of how it works until we figure out, oh, okay, well, and the thing is like, with the conclusion of the show, we can only infer that they're just going to continue to kind of run into each other's lives and it's not going to work out for the rest of their lives. Like, that's kind of the inference is like, well, this is kind of like a doomed romance. It's like Eternal Sunshine all over again, but there's no science fiction. It's just life.
You'll stay and I'll go. And
yeah. Yeah. And that's tough too in the situation of you meet the right person or you think you met the right person. I don't know how that works essentially. And then the idea of like, oh, everything's great. There's no sour feelings. Nothing terrible happened. But like, hey, life's in the way and I gotta go do this thing. You gotta go do this thing. And it's going to separate us. And you can't control any of that. And it's like those forces of nature that interfere with our relationships are like some of the most painful to get over because it's the what ifs of like, well, what if I didn't make that choice? And him having to leave to go to New York at the end of the show, and he doesn't really want to do it at first too. And that really resonated with me is the idea of where it was like, if I'm in New York, I'm gonna get lost. I'm depressed anyways. I'm not gonna know where to go. What if I hate it there? And essentially she's like, well, you got to do it to figure that out or else you're never going to be able to achieve that dream of writing.
Yeah.
And like that was very much me in deciding to go to Florida or not for the first time. That was very much my process was like, I don't know if I should do that. I don't know if I should actually go that far away from home, yada, yada, yada. Essentially had conversations with people that are like, you just got to try it. You just got to try it. You can leave in 4 months if that's what it takes, but you got to try it or else you're going to spend the rest of your life thinking, what if I did that and it actually changed things? And it worked out. So there you go. But like having to leave some of those core relationships behind and leave things behind in order to go achieve those things is powerful. And that was like the last scene with that conversation is so palpable. It was, I mean, hurting.
Yeah.
It hurt me. Yeah, like, and the fact that it ends, the entire series kind of ends on that note. Because it's like, oh, everything's done that needs to be said. We could have seen him leave and then be like all sad and then have this dramatic music, but it's like, we already know that's going to happen. We already got it. This is where it ends. This is their story. And I loved that. That was great.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, nothing. Oh gosh, just yeah. Oh my god, just really so good. Something I know you were kind of saying before about kind of like the repetitiveness of it and whatnot of the story. I feel like when people complain about that, like with television, it's kind of funny because the reason why most filmmakers, I'm thinking about right now, Alfonso Cuarón has his Disclaimer miniseries starting on Apple TV Plus right now, which I've been really obsessed with since I saw the beginning at TIFF. And he was just drawn to, he talks about being drawn to bringing these big ideas from movies like Bergman, Ingmar Bergman, other kind of famous filmmakers, to something that can take a lot of time, take over 7 episodes in Disclaimer, and we spend time with Connell and Marie for 12 episodes in Normal People versus a 2-hour movie. We let the life of theirs sit in. We let how long, Normal People is. We take a lot of time. It's just kind of this grand romance. You're going to feel how grand it is over 6 hours compared to 2. And, and so I think that kind of helps. And I think that's kind of the reasons why filmmakers are drawn to that medium of television. I think the guy who directed all those episodes, his name was Lenny Abramson or something like that.
Yeah, he's the guy who also directed Rome.
Oh my gosh, I never make that connection. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
What else has he done? Yeah.
I think, did he do Glass Castle as well, or am I wrong?
I'm gonna look it up, right?
I could be wrong. You should fact check me on that. I could be spreading false information. Oh, another scene that destroyed me was in episode 7 when they have the discussion in the kitchen and realize that their breakup was all a misunderstanding.
Yes.
And they could have been together this whole time, but they were like, "Oh, I thought you meant this, and I thought you meant." And now she's like unhappy in this relationship, and they can't do anything about it. It's just like,
Okay.
and again, that's just the idea of like how difficult it is in a relationship, or just generally social cues, misunderstandings, grand gesture, all these things. There's so many things that are so difficult to navigate because everyone's so different. Everyone has a different interpretation of how things go. So like, and again, it's just how people are. We all have different opinions on movies and music and all that stuff. That's kind of just how we all connect as people. But we also do that in social situations as well. As like, I can say one thing, and then somebody will interpret that as one thing, and someone else will interpret that as another thing, and that is essentially a rocky road when it comes to trying to be like, well, this is what I mean by saying that, and then somebody's like, oh, well, I thought you meant this, and it's like, oh, no, that's not what I was trying to get at all. And that idea carries this whole show. This whole show is about miscommunication. It is about people not, because like they're supposed to be in each other's lives, but they also fundamentally don't understand something about each other, and that's why they keep separating. And essentially it becomes to the fact to where she is a bit of she likes kind of the pain and suffering of some of her relationships, and Connell cannot get himself to do that because he's a good guy. And there's that fundamental misconnect that I think kind of keeps them like this the whole time, which is interesting. And I like, again, there's a deeper line there that's really hard for me to like. I'm trying to process it even as we're talking, because there's something there. Like there is something, because they get along and they do care and love about one another, but there is something there that they fundamentally don't understand about each other, and I think that's a part of it for sure.
It brings to mind like one of my favorite quotes from the show. It's when I believe they're in Italy and they're kind of sitting on some steps, and then Connell's like, I don't believe in God, but I believe he like made me for you, or something like that. Something along those lines. It's like, ooh, that is like, it's hard hitting. Yeah. It's also something he delivers as like out of a 1950s Hollywood movie kind of too. It's just moments like that.
Well, it's also interesting because that means there is a part of him that's spiritual. Mm-hmm. Even though he's saying that, but there's a part of him that understands that there's something about the world and destiny that brought them together for a specific reason. And again, the show's never really going to go out and tell us. I'm glad it doesn't. That's just our way of interpretation. And again, I think in a way of interpretation is the fact that, like, even as they both continue to live on with their lives, they'll always have a supporter, even if it's complicated because of their history. And because there's that scene, one of the scenes where they're like in bed together after she ends up having that fight with Jamie, and like Connell, they kind of hold each other and they start kissing, and all of a sudden they realize, shoot, we can't do that, and they stop and they just lay there in the bed and they're like shaking essentially. It's devastating. Yeah, because you're like,
tension.
Because you're like, but they can't, but they should, but like it's complicated, but should they? Because they keep hurting each other, but also like I don't know. Like,
So
and it's like I think Carson Runquist's letterbox log for this was essentially like I screamed at the TV more during this than like a football game, and I completely get
yeah.
that.
So I looked, Lenny Abramson, after Room, he did a movie called A Little Stranger, and then he did Normal People, and that Conversations with Friends. He didn't do Glass Castle. I also want to mention
Okay.
that he was not the only director. He did 6 episodes, and then a woman named Hattie McDonald did the other 6. Oh my gosh, he did Beautiful Thing. It's a 90s gay
Oh.
movie that I really love, so that's cool to see. She did some Doctor Who episodes, and a Howard's End BBC remake. That's cool. Hetty and Lenny, good job. Um,
Y'all did good.
yeah,
Y'all hurt me.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what other things in this show that made me go, wow.
Just like
The whole show.
Everything. Let's get some tentacles. The cinematography, I know, it's just it's no Gravity or Children of Men. I'm sorry, Alfonso's very high in my mind right now, but it's just the capturing the quiet beauty, like the iconic kind of poster shot of them, and like the reeds of wherever that. Yeah, I think the reeds. I don't know, and just kind of like the subtle beauty of like their high school and when they go to college and everything seems like bigger in the nightlife and lighting and yeah. My poster on that I picked out on Letterboxd is kind of them in like a purple lighting, kind of looking at each other, I think, at one of the parties. So it's like, yeah, very good.
Yeah, it definitely knows time and place really well. I really love media that captures seasons well. And so, like, when you get to Christmas, it feels like Christmas. You know, when it's summer, it feels like summer. So it does feel like you get the passage of time with these characters, which, again, really helps with the 12-episode structure. Like, we got it, and it's nice. Oh, another scene where I was like, was when the last abusive boyfriend, like, shuts the door in her face. And then Connell comes over and it's essentially like, you better not touch her ever again. And like runs over to the car and essentially it's like, I'm never going to let anyone hurt you like that ever again, not while I'm around. Ah! So good. Just like, yeah. And this idea that like, even after all the misunderstanding and all the pain and all the remorse, that he's still just like, there's a part of him that's like, I have to protect her and I have to figure this out and I have to know. It's beautiful. It's profound because it kind of shows that like,
we love storytelling.
Love, and no matter what it looks like, whether it's a platonic love or a romantic love or just a general understanding of just caring about one another, it can transcend so much. And I'm not saying that like if you're with someone who's abusive or if you're a friendship that's toxic or whatever, you should just stay around for that person, because you shouldn't. But I'm also saying that like there is a beautiful idea of friendship and relationships of people who continue to care about one another even when there's miscommunication, even when there's upset feelings, and even when there's misunderstandings, and even when there's hard times, you know? And that's the thing, like when we have hard times and when you try to struggle and grow, you should just like stay there for one another no matter what that looks like. And that's the idea of it being unconditional.
What the award season was like. So at the Emmys, Paul Mescal got nominated for lead actor. Lenny Aberson got a directing nom for episode 5. And then I guess Sally Rooney wrote.
Which one is episode 5? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm curious why that was the specific one.
I know they have to submit a specific episode. Episode 5 is Marie and Connell grow closer. Connell begins to spend more time with her friend group despite not particularly fitting in. Connell apologizes for how he previously treated her. After thinking of her, she dumps Gareth and sleeps with Connell after returning from the party. However, another member of the group, Jamie, has an eye on Marie.
Huh. I wonder why that's the one. That wouldn't be the one that sticks out to me, but whatever. That's interesting.
And then I guess Sally Rooney wrote the show because she was nominated for her, and then a woman named Alice Birch were nominated for writing for episode 3 specifically. That was the School Days Come to Close. Oh, okay. Um, and then come the Golden Globes, though, it was kind of the opposite, whereas Paul Mescal was only nominated at the Emmys. Golden Globe, Daisy Edgar Jones is the only one that gets nominated for Normal People at the Globes, and then the show got nominated for Best Limited Series or Television Film.
Interesting.
So it was just like the fact that, you know, both of them never got nominated for the same thing. Only Paul got one at the Emmys, and then the Globes, Daisy got one. So
they got the split at the end of the day, I guess. That's interesting, though.
They didn't win, unfortunately, on those two big television, but they were still nominated. It was still, like, you know, talked about and all that jazz.
Again, they're both incredible in this show, and should both be.
I mean, their rewards is like their career now. Like, holy,
totally.
They're doing so great. They're so good.
Because I think
they're both gonna be. They're gonna both be at least Oscar nominated. Like, Daisy is going to be Oscar nominated by the time we're like 50. Like, she has to be. You know,
totally. She'll get that right role eventually. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Like,
on swift horses. No, I'm kidding.
I mean,
we all know the Sony Pictures Classic Awards push. Probably not this year, though, for sure. They're gonna be too busy with Room Next Door, but we shall see.
I mean, like, Room Next Door is not gonna do much, so yeah.
They love Pedro Almodovar. Sorry to go into awards talk, but they love Pedro Almodovar. I think they distribute like almost all his films here in the U.S. So who knows? And they have that kind of golden lion. They have that golden lion. They're gonna be like, let's try and push that. I think they're gonna try, especially if they don't have anything else. Anyway.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. But Normal People, this show has a lot of truth to it. And, like, what I can say is that, like, if you've experienced, I don't know, heartbreak, confusion, if you've struggled with this, any sort of idea of, like, the what ifs, kind of in a similar vein of Past Lives, like, this show is worth watching because I think it has a lot to say about kind of who we are as humans and the connections that we make and kind of the ways that we change and we grow because of the people that we make. And it's one of these things where it's at the end of the day, you can be like, man, there's a lot of wasted time, or I wish I could have done this. I wish I could have said this. And essentially this show is saying, like, well, you know, you could get multiple chances over and over again, and it might just turn out this way because essentially life is pushing you in this certain direction and we're never going to know exactly why. So it's scary. I mean, like, people joke that it's a horror show, but it kind of is in a way, because it is scary to think about, like, if you put this much time and investment in people and places and then it doesn't entirely work out for you, then, like, where are you? But, like, hey, you want to be who you were if it wasn't for the people that we meet or the connections we make or the places that we go to. So
after all, we are who we are. We're gonna get an episode. We are gonna get an episode. It's gonna happen. I'm manifesting. Yeah.
Someday. Yeah. It's that and then the queer episode.
Oh yeah. I don't know. There's a maybe with like George or something. And we need to find someone else who's passionate. Like, oh, I'm not diminishing you. Sorry, no, but like, yeah.
I was saying I didn't.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So it wouldn't be like.
But the vibe is just like just around that movie from the film. So I don't know. It's weird. Queer and the reception has been like, it's definitely a really love it like me, or a okay, that was something, that was a movie.
And that has been this episode of Workshopping Humanity on Normal People. Special thanks for Jared Rocha for coming on to talk about Normal People, which, once again, if you listen to the episode, is a show that I absolutely loved. So just make sure to follow our website, workshoppinghumanity.com, where you'll see more podcasts, reviews, editorials, and make sure to follow A1 and A2 Productions, a new thing that me and contributor George Arid are starting, where we're going to be producing our own short films and kind of just indie projects, all the sorts. So we'll see you guys in the next episode, and thanks so much for watching.